Hello and welcome. My name is Rashi Mogha and I'm your host for this Empowered Women of the World podcast. This podcast is for you, it is for me, and it is for all women who want to take charge of their career and happiness. In this weekly podcast, we'll talk about technology, we'll talk about leadership, and we'll talk about mindfulness. We'll talk about how you can discover, visualize, and actualize your success, whatever that means to you. We will also talk about our common opponent, the conscious and unconscious bias, which we deal with on a daily basis. And we'll share ways to navigate work politics. At the end of each podcast, I will share with you a tip or a resource that you can use to be successful. It's going to be a fun ride, so hop on and join me on this journey every week. I hope you and your families are staying safe by practicing social distancing. We are in unprecedented times, and I'm here in California where we have shelter in place to help contain the COVID-19 pandemic. So maintain social distancing, be safe. Before we start today's podcast, I also wanted to remind you about our upcoming eWOW 2020 virtual summit on April 25th. It is global, virtual, and empowering summit that you can attend from anywhere in the world. So be here with us on 25th of April in your pajamas with a cup of coffee, and we can talk about leadership, technology, and entrepreneurship with leaders from companies like Google and Roku. It's going to be an action-packed day, so make sure that you get your tickets ASAP. Today, I'm excited to welcome Franziska Hauck to the show. Franziska is a speaker, an engineering leader, and a diversity evangelist. Franziska lives with a chronic illness called Factor V resistance, and her talks focus on how to bring awareness across chronic illnesses at workplace. Hi, Franziska. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rashim. It's great to be here.
So, Franziska, I haven't really heard about this chronic illness that you have, Factor V resistance, and I hadn't heard about it until I spoke to you. What is FVR and how has your work life changed because of that?
So it's a Factor V resistance. The V stands for the Roman letter 5, actually. And that is the description for a genetic disorder that basically affects the fifth blood clotting factor in your blood. So when we look at blood clotting, there are 13 factors in the blood that control it. And the enzyme that controls it in my body is basically out of order. And that leads to a whole host of challenges. First of all, the blood is too thick, so you have a tendency to have blood clots and thrombosis, for example. Circulation in general is bad. There is low blood pressure. You're also prone to get heart attacks or strokes, for example, so really, really severe issues right there. And there are also a couple of other things that are affected. Because Factor V resistance has to do with blood, it affects the whole body in essence. And one of the things that's really interesting to note about it is that it's not well researched. 3% of the Caucasian population has Factor V resistance, and that only a fraction of those people show symptoms of any shape. And the symptom spectrum is also very wide. So there are people that are not affected by it at all and just live very average and normal lives. And then there are people that that are on the high end of the symptom spectrum, which is the case with me. So I have a high symptom spectrum. I am affected in many ways by Factor V resistance. And as I said, it's a genetic disorder, so there is no cure for it. It's basically in your DNA. And to be able to cure it, you would have to actually change your DNA.
Wow, I did not realize that. So, but in spite of Factor V resistance, Franziska, you have had a flourishing career at Google and now as an engineering lead. Talk to me a little bit about what your advice is to people who have chronic illnesses, and what are some of the best practices that you have identified living with chronic illnesses and still being a
successful
leader?
So the first advice that I always give people that live with a chronic illness is to actually be selfish a little bit. We have a society, obviously, where we all want to support each other and be there for each other. When you live with a chronic illness, you oftentimes have specific needs. You have special needs that maybe another person doesn't have. And it's always good to be able to be vocal about this, to be able to express that, and also to have the, let's say, the environment to be able to be open about it even. So that is essential, because once you actually communicate what your needs are, it will change dramatically for you. You will have an environment, you will also create an environment for yourself where there is a lot of support from your colleagues, where you can thrive, where you are enabled to succeed. And for me, starting out, obviously, I would say I'm high on the symptom spectrum, but I'm still fairly functioning in terms of chronic illness. So I do have, for example, arthrosis in my hip, which on some days it hurts, and walking stairs is really difficult for me. But on other days, I'm actually quite fine, and I can do things, for example, like dance. And that in itself is a very good thing. So I'm still, let's say, physically able to do a lot of things. Other people might not be, or they might have a higher proportion of bad days. And just to be able to tell your employer about that, and also from the employer side, obviously, to have that understanding and the willingness to provide the right environment for that person, that is crucial. And once you have that, and once you can communicate that, your colleagues can take that into consideration as well, right? So we are talking about very, let's say, simple things, or simple in the sense of established things like a barrier-free workplace. So barrier-free in essence at the workplace means that you have elevators, for example, so that people don't have to walk stairs. You have maybe a quiet room where you can withdraw and you can meditate, or you can even, if you have that situation, change a dressing or give yourself a shot, for example. So those are some of the measures that enable barrier-free environment. Also, when we look at, for example, web accessibility, that is always a consideration, so that you have the right tools, maybe lenses, maybe a screen reader, that you can actually read the applications that you're using when you are blind, or there are other conditions, obviously, hard of hearing and so forth. So barrier-free is a collection of things that employers can do to make their employees functioning, to enable them, and to make them comfortable at the end of the day. But when I look at the wide spectrum of chronic illnesses and disabilities that we have out there, there's actually much, much more that you can do. And this is a myriad of things which affects, for example, food. So if you are an employer who provides food, then it's really good to have options where people know which kind of allergens the food contains, or that they have the option to also mix things for themselves. So if you have a food intolerance, you can take that into consideration. So that's, for example, one of the things that employers can look at. Also, generally, lights is a consideration. How strong are lights, for example, because there are people that could get epilepsy or migraines from that. Also, having the option to take breaks, for example, and to have the understanding from your colleagues that's okay to take breaks because you might need them. And then finally, also activities. When we think about team events, and a lot of team events are obviously very physically challenging for some people, right? If you go to laser tag, for example. So having activities that can be done by all, that are inclusive, that have alternative options for activities. Those are some of the things that employers can do to make sure that this is an inclusive environment. But the most important aspect is actually mindset, and is language. How do I speak to people? How do I announce things? How do I phrase my messaging? And if I make sure that I can include people there as well, people of all kinds of backgrounds and of all kinds of stages and spectrums, then that is also a very good thing that employers can do.
That's a great extensive list. But in my experience, Franziska, as I've spoken to people who have chronic illnesses, they have that perception, or they shy away from letting their employers know about these chronic illnesses, because they think that there will be some conscious or unconscious bias that they will be dealing with if they do that. What has been your experience around it?
You are absolutely right about that. That is something that comes up in a lot of discussions that I have with people that also have chronic illnesses and disabilities. And there's a lot of fear of repercussions, especially when it comes to your career, right? People fear that they will be seen as less functioning or less performing. And also, we are looking at a shift in mindset here. It's very important to, first of all, have an open culture, also a feedback culture and appreciation culture, and also to create an environment where any kind of diversity, be that in the sense of chronic illnesses or disabilities, or your background or sexuality or whatnot, where that is, let's say, the normal standard, right? You have a diverse environment. And what that does automatically is that people are used to interacting with people of various backgrounds, and they are accepting of things that might not be in their experience, right? We often look at what has been our own experience and how can I understand the other person better. And that's also where you can foster empathy a lot. Once you establish a culture where thinking about others and incorporating that into your, let's say, HR practices and all that, that can really help. And again, I encourage people at this point to be a bit selfish and also to be bold and courageous and to speak out. We are, and you will know that also, we work in tech, and tech is a very good environment already because we have a very diverse sphere of people working in that. And also we have the opportunity to have psychological safety in a lot of companies, in a lot of settings and so forth. So that is basically essential. Contribute both from the side of the employer and also from the side of the employee, who is courageous in explaining their needs and explaining what they live with, maybe even starting with a very small circle, and then that expands bit by bit, and after a while it becomes the normal thing to have someone on the team who has a chronic illness or disability, and the acceptance rate rises. There's much more basically that you can do at this point, but these are some of the general things that I would look into.
And I'm so glad you mentioned about psychological safety, because that's the key element. While, making organizations and making the work environment barrier-free has a lot of logistics semantics to it. Psychological safety is what people managers can do right away to make everybody feel welcomed in the team and give everybody that sense of belongingness in a team. Franziska, you are now a people manager. What best practices do you follow to make sure that people within your team who have chronic illnesses are comfortable in the team setup and can perform optimally? And then also, to the flip side, I have another question for you. How did you set expectations with your team, and how did you open up about your chronic illnesses to your team?
That's an interesting question there, because I started recently as a people manager and basically went through the whole process. So I might start with that actually. And for me, I'm a very open person in that sense. I'm not afraid of sharing my needs. And interestingly enough, I did that on a stage while I was on the job hunt. And I had the same fears of repercussions as everybody else in that sense. But on the other hand, I feel like it's good to set an example and to be vocal about that you can have a chronic illness, but you can also want to be a high performer, right? And also be a high performer at the end of the day. And for me, I do this usually in stages, so I don't come into a company and then announce this is what I have and this is what I live with, but I put my trust into, let's say, a small circle of colleagues first. And then bit by bit, I share more about my needs as I go. And I did that with my teams as well. So I have what I call a people manual. And this basically is a small document that describes your characteristics, what you expect from others, for example, in communication and interaction, but you can also use it to describe your needs in the sense of health and well-being. And this is what I did. And this makes sharing much, much easier, because instead of talking one-to-one with every person, you can actually refer to that document. And it also takes away the pressure of having to talk about it with a lot of people. You can just have that written text and then base a lot of your discussions on that as well. And this is what I encourage in my teams as well. And for me, what you mentioned, the psychological safety is very important. So first of all, confidentiality is crucial here. When a direct report comes to you and they talk about that they have a chronic illness or disability, but they don't wish to share it with someone else, it's very, very important to respect that. But to, at the same time, encourage them to keep an open mind, and to also give people on the team a chance to share that with them, to exchange with them on that, and to find understanding. And also, as I said, a culture of appreciation and feedback. Obviously, this is in every team, wherever you look, this is a process, right? You often don't have psychological safety overnight. But to be able to give feedback, receive feedback, to be able to exchange with people on an eye level, that all enables people who live with a chronic illness basically along the way. And also the sense of a culture of appreciation. So if somebody did something great, mention that, underline that, and then over time you have a team where you are bold enough to be able to, for example, talk about failure, and in that sense to talk about things that are being seen as a defect in society. Often enough that still happens, and that way you can basically remove the stigma that we still have established in our society, and people open up bit by bit.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because it's not just being accepted by your manager or the person whom you report into. It's also being accepted by your peers and your colleagues, right, and your co-workers. And you want that acceptance and that appreciation to come from everybody. So that building that culture of appreciation and driving that inclusion is really important. So Franziska, I know you're working on great things. Would you like to share with our audience what's next for Franziska?
Actually, there's a lot on the agenda, so I'll just share a bit. But yeah, basically I want to continue my advocacy for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities. For me, that is super, super crucial. And that can involve being on a stage and talking about that, but also doing that on a smaller scale, for example, at my workplace. And then I'm also freelancing on the side a little bit. So I'm offering services in DevRel, for example, and currently I am compiling statistics on developers in Germany. So I have a presentation on developer insights. So usually these days you can find me knee deep in the statistics and numbers. So those are some of the points that will be coming up over the next weeks and months. And I'm very much looking forward to 2020 and exchanging with the community, with peers on all matters, DevRel, people management, and of course, advocacy for chronic illnesses and disabilities.
Well, I'm so excited for you, and I can't wait for you and your team to attend our upcoming eWOW Summit. Thanks for being on the show, Franziska, and sharing your thoughts with the eWOW family. And today's resource for you is the link to the eWOW Virtual Summit. The link is in the show notes, so make sure to check it out. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for loving, liking, supporting, and sharing the podcast. Remember, sharing is caring. I love your feedback, emails, and messages, so please keep them coming. I look forward to seeing you again in our next podcast. Till then, please stay safe and keep empowering the world.